Today is December 7th, 2023, and it is the 25th episode of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I am joined by Joe Meade tonight. Joe and I will go over some rumblings in college football. That's a pretty broad topic, Joe. And then we'll go over a rather big coaching change, and we'll go over some of the action in college hoops, some teams still playing bye games, other teams playing it's conference games. So there's a lot to talk about. Joe, we'll get it right into it. There's a couple different rumors that we can talk about in football. Why don't you take it away?
Yeah, well, I guess in the world we live in with so many rumors, let's actually go with what's stated fact. One of them is Manny Diaz, Penn State's D coordinator, really the star of that coaching staff the last 2 years, is going to be the new head coach at Duke. I think this is pretty major ramifications for Penn State, not only immediately on the recruiting and for their bowl game against Ole Miss, but also for next year. That's going to be two new coordinators next year. The offensive coordinator from Kansas and now D coordinator of choice. It's going to be interesting to see whether they promote from within or they promote or they look outside. But Sean, Diaz really had that defense rocking. I understand the criticism of him against Ohio State in particular. Don't really think he could have done much better than what he did against Michigan this year. He pretty much held them until the whole house came crashing down. But that was mainly due to Drew Aller and the offensive passing game being able to do nothing against Michigan. So I think that could be a really big loss for Penn State, especially if they don't pick the right coordinator, because frankly their offense is going to need a lot of next year, and if their defense is still in question, that could not be good for the Lions. So big loss for them there. Do think that Penn State D coordinator, based on the fact that the last two have gotten head coaching jobs, it's a very lucrative position. So I guess search committee for Penn State goes to work. Other than that, Sean, some rumors out of Ohio State should train him enter the portal yesterday, but what's going to happen with Travion Henderson and Marvin Harrison Jr.? Really, all these guys. None of them in the 2021 recruiting class, the Denzel Burks, the Jack Sawyers, the JT Tulamuluwals, have declared for the draft yet. But you have to figure some of these decisions are coming soon. And the rumor out of Columbus is that there are major and millions of dollars worth of efforts being pointed toward Marvin Harrison Jr. and Travion Henderson to stay. So Marvin did say today that he wanted to come back to beat the team up north, being Michigan, and to win a Big Ten title. Do I really believe that? I do. Do I think that will make him stay? Sean, what do you think about that?
I mean, if you take one look at a mock draft, you do not have to go very far down to find his name. He's going to be the first non-quarterback taken, most likely, and you just can't risk that, even if it's $1 million NIL deal with your name on it. You can get, we very rarely does a decision, very rarely do college football players come back because, you have to play for 3 years. And the last one who I can remember who came back to college that shouldn't have is Matt Barkley at USC, and he had a pretty poor senior year, and now he's on the fringes looking for a third-string job in the NFL. So I don't think he'll come back, and I'm a little bit surprised that he hasn't already declared, but that NIL keeps better players in the game, whether that's football or basketball, and that does improve the product. That's without question. All the issues of NIL aside, better players are playing the game. So I think other than that, Joe, we just have a lot of rumors, including some more conference realignment. The team from the ACC that is not very pleased about their fifth-ranked position in the college football playoff rankings. Is it more than just rumors at this point, Joe, that they're considering a move to the Big Ten?
I think it is. I think they're still fresh off the outrage from Sunday, and as we went over on our previous episode, I believe they have every right to be outraged. I guess the more immediate future, Donovan McCulley, the former Indiana quarterback slash receiver, looks like he's getting a lot of looks, especially from Michigan. So maybe an interdivisional or interconference transfer. I guess interdivisional wouldn't be relevant for 2024. And other than that, Sean, the only other rumor is Dante Moore. Perhaps he's shopping both Michigan and Ohio State. Michigan, as of today, does like their chances. Again, King High School right out of Detroit. A lot of people thought he would go to Michigan straight out of high school. Went to UCLA, wanted to start right away. Did, struggled a lot with turnovers, had some brilliant moments, but really looked like a deer in headlights, as most freshmen do when starting, most true freshmen do when starting at a major Power Five school like UCLA. But something to keep an eye on, especially perhaps it could be an indicator of whether JJ McCarthy comes back for the Wolverines next year. But other than that, Sean, just rumors I won't even put into air because I don't believe the validity of a lot of them. You know, a lot of Instagram comments will indicate something, but everyone knows everyone. Everyone knows a lawyer. Everyone knows a doctor, but often we don't know what the truth is until the 11th hour. So, Sean, with that said, should we get into some basketball?
Yeah, we'll turn the page real quick here. We still got, at least more than a week until that first bowl game. So we will try and get to all the bowl games that Big Ten teams are in, even if it's just a couple minutes. But today's not that day. We're turning the page to basketball, Joe. A lot of action started on Tuesday with some conference play and then some teams playing non-conference games. Let's go to the Garden first, where Illinois beat FAU 98-89. What an impressive performance from the Fighting Illini here. Many people think Florida Atlantic are national championship contenders, and I certainly think that they're Final Four contenders. And Illinois puts 98 on them, 33 points each from Marcus Domask and Terrence Shannon Jr. Joe, Illinois is definitely the second best team in the Big Ten so far, right?
John, this last probably that 4 day stretch for Illinois, winning at Rutgers, really dominating them at the end and beating FAU. I don't think they've had that good a stretch since COVID year, really, because I understand they won the conference in 2022, but I don't think Illinois has felt this good about their team since that COVID year. Certainly don't want to overreact too much to two really good games in December, but this is how Illinois is really supposed to play. Terrence Shannon going off. I think it's unrealistic for him and Domask to score above 30. I think if that's the expectation, you're going to fall flat every time. But even getting help off the bench, getting, I believe it was 19, almost 20 bench points. That's a really great thing for Illinois. I think, with Purdue with the loss already, Michigan State with the loss, and who we'll get into later, that there's a chance Illinois could be a dark horse, maybe the one we always thought Wisconsin would be. Perhaps Illinois is right up there.
Yeah.
I think the FAU could have played better defense. That is probably the one knock on them nationally. I think that is fair, but when you are scoring 98 points against the top borderline top 10 team, that does deserve a lot of credit.
Yeah, Illinois is a big team that also is fast enough. That's what I got from that game. FAU plays four guards who are all really good, and then they have a big guy, Vlad Golden, who's awesome too. But they were able to guard, the four-man for Illinois was able to guard, a 6'6" guard for FAU, which is going to be big because there's, other than maybe IU, there's not a team that can match them size-wise, and if they're able to not really get beat off the dribble that much, that's a good sign for the Fighting Illini. To the conference game, Joe, the first one on Peacock. Wisconsin goes into the zone and puts it on the Spartans, 70-57. Michigan State is 4-4. Wisconsin is playing pretty well right now, but unfortunately for them, the story here is going to be Michigan State. They have a ton of expectations coming into the year. Lose a couple early against good teams, and you think, all right, well, they'll figure it out. But there's a big, big danger that this is not a good team at all in East Lansing.
Don, I do, before we get into ripping Michigan State, which is what a lot of Detroit and state media in Michigan has done. Again, more credit to Wisconsin. Jonathan Blackwell, we keep highlighting him because that was what they missed last year. Presence off the bench, 10 points, only 5 more from other bench players. But, Sean, I do have to highlight H.A. Storr, 22 points.
He's the difference between last year and this year.
Absolutely, him too. With that said, Sean, they just never let Michigan State back in this game. Michigan State would get it to within 4 or 5, and I think that was the difference between this year's Wisconsin team and last year's Wisconsin team. When they'd be on the road, they'd get out to 8, 10-point leads, but the moment a team would hit 2 shots in a row and the crowd would come alive again, Wisconsin would fold will get hit between the eyes and fold like a 10. And I don't see that happening this year with Wisconsin. I understand they didn't start off the year great, but ever since that win at Virginia, it seems like this team has been way against Virginia, I should say. This team has been way different. And to me, beating Virginia, Marquette, and even winning in East Lansing is nothing to scoff at. I don't care how good or bad anyone thinks Michigan State is. Those are three huge wins in under a month that they've had. So that tells me Wisconsin, as we talked about with Illinois, another team that's probably Wisconsin's more surprising than Illinois, but another team that's right up there. And, they're ranked 23rd now. Perhaps it's a top 15 team.
Yeah, they've been really good, and I don't think there's a whole lot of difference from them from the Marquette game. And we said, Klesmit putting 21 points up in the first half. He only scored 2 tonight. Maybe that was a little fluky. You have a good performance at home against a rival. But they backed it up with a equally as impressive win. But Michigan State is, even if they do turn this around and get a 7 seed, it's about time that they figured out how to start the season. I mean, don't schedule all these hard games if you're not going to be playing well at the beginning of the year. Now, we've praised him for that before, but I think it's time to turn that a little bit into, you're putting yourself so far up against it to just make the tournament now. And they do have Baylor on next week.
Next Saturday.
Next Saturday. And that's a good opportunity for a win. But if they don't get that, they are looking, they have a serious chance of missing the NCAA tournament. And can't say that you saw that coming from Michigan State. They need somebody else to show up other than Tyson Walker. Hogard has been really bad. Akins hasn't really done much. The forwards haven't done much. What else can you say about Michigan State?
I'd say if you're a Michigan or Michigan State fan, book your tickets to the NIT final, the Michigan State NIT final. I guess putting that joke aside because it's been used too much in the state of Michigan over the past 48 hours. Tyson Walker needs help, but I understand Jackson Kohler's not back, and a lot of people are defending Michigan State's performance, but you can't defend their performance. You could say if Kohler's in there, they're a different team, and I would tend to agree, but going forward,
not that much better. Maybe a couple points.
Yeah. I think the argument shot is that they have zero post presence right now, and another one is that Xavier Booker. I think Mike Valletti on Detroit radio called it out, saying he's the biggest human cardboard cutout he's ever seen because he doesn't think he exists since a lot of 5 stars. That's been a criticism of Izzo ever since the early 2010s that 5 stars kind of disappear there. I will say, forward looking for Michigan State at Nebraska versus Baylor, there's absolutely zero way you could lose both of those games. Zero. You cannot go 4-5 losing at Pinnacle Bank Arena. I understand it's kind of a hard place to play, but no, come on, Nebraska just lost to Minnesota. You're
After
Michigan State
basketball.
A lot. Exactly. There's absolutely zero chance Michigan State can lose that game. And frankly, I think they need the Baylor game just to get their mojo and their swagger back, because having 0 quad 1 wins at this stage for Michigan State with all the opportunities they've had, Sean, is that probably the most surprising thing you've seen in this conference so far?
Definitely. Like I said earlier, they always take their lumps early, but they usually win a couple of them. Like they won last year, they lost to Gonzaga in the aircraft carrier, but they looked really good, and then they won the next game against Nova at home in the Gavitt games, and then they Champions Classic. If you play in all these games, you have to get a couple of them. You can't go 0-6 in your 6 good non-conference games, and they're looking that right in the face right now. But they have, like you said, they have no post presence, Joe. They don't really have a perimeter presence either. They're a poor 3-point shooting team. They were 6 for 19 today. It's about as good of a percentage as they've had this year, and they just got to play better. There's not one thing that they're doing wrong, which is a little bit of a worry, I would think. Because if there's one thing wrong, a good coach usually can maybe not completely fix it, but at least hide it enough. And Izzo's got quite a lot of work to do. Next game on Peacock, Joe, at Chrysler Center, Indiana 78, Michigan 75. If you have watched an Indiana-Michigan game the last couple of years, this one was no different. Right down the stretch, Michigan does not play well. in a close game again, as you predicted. And Indiana comes out of there 2-0 in the Big Ten, 7-1 overall. Michigan 4-5. But what were your thoughts on this one before we go more into it?
Maybe this is just my Michigan lens on, as opposed to my in a nutshell Big Ten college basketball recap lens. This was just more of the same for a Michigan fan. It kind of felt like I texted Sean right after the game saying, this is the same script as last year's two games. You know, Michigan didn't have as much control as the meetings against Indiana in 2022-23, but certainly had their chances. In fact, they were up probably 5 or 4 most of the half until the final stretch. Then it kind of seemed like Michigan and Indiana traded the lead. It probably went back and forth for a while. Every time it was tied under 2 minutes, Indiana just got an easy layup or a dunk or some uncontested jumper. And I'm not trying to take away anything from Indiana, but the fact that this has become such a pattern for Michigan over the last 2 seasons with a different cast, that points right to coaching, right? I mean, there's no question about it. They've tried different things in practice this year, allegedly being in different situations, and they've been forced to figure it out. You would think with more veterans on this team that this couldn't happen 2 games in a row, but it has. I mean, this is a clinic on how to lose close games, missing free throws, dumb fouls, uh, turning the ball over. Terrace Reed, we highlighted this on our last episode, Sean. Indiana made him look silly at certain points. And that's what I told them to do. I said, not that they'd listen to this, but if they did, good on them, because they defensively already a great team, but a smart defensive team too at that, opportunistic. And I don't think Indiana played all that well, Sean, to be quite honest with you. I think they just knew that they had to be the smarter team to win, and they were. And they let Michigan make mistakes, which is what they've done in the past 2 seasons. And the Hoosiers are 7-1, 2-0 in the Big Ten. If you're a Hoosier fan, I don't understand how you couldn't be marked the season so far as an A.
Yeah, I mean, if you had said this point you're 7-1 with a loss to the defending national champions, I think you'd say
At
that's
the
really,
Garden too.
that's
Yeah.
really at Store South, as they call it. I think that would be understandable. Now, a couple of the early games were way too close, and that's why the analytics suck right now for the Hoosiers. But ever since the Harvard game, they've covered now 3 in a row against both the betting spread and the analytical spread, and they're shooting up the rankings now. 59th in KenPom when I looked earlier today, and they were 81 before the Harvard game. So they're definitely trending in the right direction. Joe, I think they offensively it was a mixed bag. They got a lot of high percentage looks, a few too many turnovers, and a few too many missed shots by Trey Galloway. But when you look at it, that's just kind of the way that Indiana plays. They're going to go inside. They're going to take a lot of high percentage looks. They're going to get a lot of free throws. And if they play well enough on the defensive end, they're going to have a chance. And that's why Indiana won, was because Cardio Gabe and Trey Galloway made it tough enough on Doug McDaniel. He was 3 for 14 from the field. He did make 7 of his 10 free throws, but that included at least 2 misses down the stretch. And that was just all legs. He didn't make a 3. Indiana did come in with one more day of rest than Michigan. And Indiana only had to come out from Bloomington. Michigan had to come all the way over from Eugene. And that definitely, I know you say Michigan hasn't been good in close games, but that definitely played a role down the stretch, because, if it wasn't an issue, you could easily point to that as an excuse, because it just seemed like after that last media timeout, Michigan didn't really have anything left in the tank. And in Nkamwa, they stopped going to Nkamwa when that was clearly working, and IU switched Ware onto him and made it a little tougher, but that matchup was going Michigan's way until it wasn't, and then the final whistle came. It was at the right time for the Hoosiers, and if you're Michigan, I think you are really, really in a slump right now. These were your tough games, and I know if you don't play well in your tough games, you're going to lose. So you've got Iowa, Eastern, Florida, and McNeese the rest of the year. Let me tell you, 3 of those games are going to be real tough. McNeese State has Will Wade as their coach, and they're 8-2. So you do not want to have to go into that game coming off of a lost Iowa and Florida. So I think
And
it's
if you
not.
lose to Eastern, the program should
Well,
be
yeah.
canceled. I'll put it that.
Look,
I will state that
you
right
can
on
you
this
can
on this
you can
podcast.
play defense 4 times against Eastern Michigan and win the game. I think because they do not have Amani Bates or Noah Farrakhan anymore. So I know that game was close last year, but that was some crazy shot making there by somebody who's leading scorer in the G League right now. But we'll turn the page to Wednesday, Joe. A couple of games here. Ohio State won a bye game against Miami, Ohio. Don't think we need to talk about that very much. Ohio State's still looking pretty good. Wake Forest does take care of Rutgers down in North Carolina. Rutgers looks, it might be a really rough season for Steve Peichel. They've got 2 great recruits for next year, but can't. Anyway, this season turns out to be a good one for the Scarlet Knights.
It's kind of funny, Sean. It seems like teams in this conference are either riding high or slumping. I don't think there's actually an in between, and Rutgers is unfortunately one of them. Just absolutely no offensive power whatsoever. It's the same story it's always been. So I don't think I need to say much else than that. I think today was such a good day getting uh, who they get today?
Dylan Harper.
Dylan Harper. And, I really would not want to ruin that day, ruin today, because Wednesday night playing Wake Forest, getting destroyed like that, never really being in the game is not great.
Yeah, Dylan Harper is the younger brother of Ron Harper Jr., and Dylan Harper plays on Don Bosco Prep, same high school as Giants quarterback Tommy DeVito. So nice connection there. Don Bosco is the best team in New Jersey in the Max Preps rankings, and Dylan Harper is a higher ranked recruit than his brother was. So Rutgers fans, be excited for that, because the rest of the games this year might not be so awesome. Penn State, Maryland, Joe, this game goes to overtime. You said it last time. Maryland needs to win it at absolutely all costs, and do they just barely do it? 6-point win in overtime. You have great games from Julian Reese and Jameer Young, but other than that, I don't think Maryland can feel much better about themselves out of this one. They dodged a bullet here.
Yeah, Sean, there's really no way around that. I think Penn State was really good on them to stay in this game. I guess to be positive for Maryland, they have Alcorn State, Nichols, and then at UCLA on December 22nd. Because other than that, they need to find their form. Clearly, not doing great against Indiana and really not playing well and getting away with it at home against I don't even want to say struggling Penn State team. I want to say a rebuilding Penn State team is not a good sign. And I don't know whether beating a 1-7 and 3-6 team is going to help their confidence much, but they have to figure this out. 3 of their next 4 games are absolute jokes against sub 500 teams. Then they have Purdue to open the new year on Tuesday, January 2nd. So a lot to figure out these next 3 weeks for the Terrapins.
Yeah, somebody else just has to do something. I mean, Jameer Young's been okay this year. He's been forced to do a lot. And Reese had 24 and 15. That was as good as he's looked this year. But Donta Scott, 4 points, 2 of 11 shooting. He's supposed to be a part of that big three. And then nobody else is doing anything. I mean, you get 28 and 24 from your 2 best players who both play over 40 minutes at home against the worst team in overtime, and you barely win. I mean, that's about as worse of a win as it gets. But counts as if they beat them by 30 or not. So Maryland can at least hold their breath for now. Nebraska and Minnesota, Joe. Nebraska was up 15 at halftime at the barn, and then they totally blew the lead, getting outscored in the second half, 52-26. Minnesota's 6-3. They have had a couple of tough games. Dawson Garcia did only play 7 minutes. I'm thinking this was a big missed opportunity for Fred Hoiberg and the Cornhuskers rather than an impressive win from the Gophers.
We talked about Nebraska in our preview, Sean, saying they've actually played very well in probably late January to March last year. They were probably the most dangerous team in this conference. Would you agree?
They certainly pulled off a number of upsets that really shouldn't have happened, especially where they were at. But they proved, IU played them in this, first little 2-game of the year and didn't see him again. And I said multiple times that was very lucky because they were capable of pulling off a win against anybody. They should have beaten Purdue. But yeah, they were playing like a team at least good enough to get in that 8th or 9th spot last year.
Yeah, with that said, I said they can't bury themselves a hole, and they're almost on their way to doing it. Now, of course, it sounds ridiculous. They're 7-2, but if you look at who they've beaten, it's no one that good. And the first two real teams they played, and Minnesota, I hesitate to say real. No offense to Minnesota, they need to prove it to everyone. I think Creighton's destroyed them, and then the second half was just an abomination defensively. So no other way around it. You can't get outscored by 26 points with a 15-point lead.
They didn't have Dawson Garcia either.
Yeah,
He's the only really plus offensive player on that team.
I think if you're a Nebraska ball fan, you probably felt the way I did on Saturday when Oregon beat us without their two best players. Kind of the same amount of rage and puzzle and feeling of being puzzled because that just makes no sense. That can't happen, right?
Yep. It's not like you lost a tough road game in the Big Ten. You had it. You have a 15-point lead at halftime
Against one of the worst teams in the league. Let's call a
without
spade a
their best
spade.
player.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's like you'd be like, oh yeah, we'll win that. Turned out to be not even close.
Yeah. Sean, I think the last game we should go into is one that's actually just went final mercifully. That's Iowa. They were, I don't even want to say slaughtered because that would probably be a light term, but not even a competitive game. 90-65, and at times it was probably. I don't think this game in the second half got any lower than a 20-point deficit for the Cyclones. So it looked like a typical Iowa blowout. Absolutely no defense. You could just watch the highlights. Uh, inbounds passes, guys dunking wide open. I don't understand how that happens so consistently at this level of basketball, but with the Iowa Hawkeyes defense, it certainly does. So I think there's not much else to say about that, Sean. I think my take would be the Michigan Iowa game is almost an elimination game on BTN. It's followed by another almost elimination game with Michigan State at Nebraska. And I'm going to pose this question to you, Sean. Of those four teams, Michigan, Iowa, Michigan State, Nebraska, who absolutely needs to win on Sunday?
One of the Michigan schools probably lean towards Michigan being the answer to that because Michigan State can beat Baylor and be, okay for now. But if they don't beat Nebraska, that's highly unlikely that they do it to Baylor. So, but Iowa State 90, Iowa 65, and for Big Ten fans who aren't aware of the Cyclones, they are probably the best example of Iowa football that we have in college basketball. Giving up 90 points to them is like giving up 30 to the Hawkeyes on the gridiron. And Iowa State plays tremendous defense. As shown, Iowa only got to 65. And this is a good analytical win for the Cyclones in the Big 12 because you know how much the numbers love Iowa because they blow bad teams out. And this is going to look great for Iowa State. Iowa State's a good team, not top 25, probably maybe 6 seed ceiling wise, but they can guard, and when they have easy layups, anybody can win when they get those types of shots. And Iowa needs to be careful. They lost to, I want to say, Eastern Illinois last year, or another team down there in the 300s because they didn't play defense. And they have Florida A&M, UMBC, and Northern Illinois in their bye games after the Michigan game, Joe, and they've got to be careful because those teams, Florida A&M is the toughest strength of schedule in the country, and then UMBC and Northern Iowa both have 5 wins already, so they got to be careful that they don't lose one there. But quick preview, Joe, right at 29 minutes. We've got a couple really good games on Saturday, including Big Ten teams. We'll roll through them pretty quick. And then Sunday, we have the 2 games that you already said, Joe. But Saturday, first, we'll go to Illinois at Tennessee on Rocky Top at noon on CBS. Good opportunity for Illinois to pick up another impressive win.
Yeah, Tennessee, I think, besides Purdue, right?
What's that?
Besides, Tennessee's made light work of the Big Ten. They beat Michigan State in a scrimmage, beat Wisconsin.
Yes.
They lost to Purdue too. Yes. So
in Hawaii, yeah.
Yes. So 2-1, 3-1 if you want to count scrimmages against the Big Ten. I think Illinois cools down. It's not an insult to them, but they've just been on fire, and you have to figure that's gonna come not crashing down, but come to a slight halt. I still think Illini fans would be more than happy with the stretch they've had, winning at Rutgers and then um, beating a really good FAU team on a neutral court. I think their resume for March is already really strong, and I nothing much else than house money. I mean, maybe you could get another great performance out of the offense. Maybe someone else helps out Terrence Shannon, but
Yeah, Tennessee hasn't been great defensively this year, and that's kind of their thing. So if you get going again, um, Tennessee is not going to drop 90 on you. They'll beat you in the 60s or 70s. But I'm curious to see where that line will be at because I think it should be, both the teams are pretty close. I would think Tennessee may be slight favorites being home, and they've got a really, really good atmosphere there. But that'll be interesting. Noon on CBS on Saturday. 1:30 on Saturday on Fox. It's the Hall of Fame series in Toronto. Nate Oates in Alabama play number 4 Purdue. Good opportunity for the Boilers to pick up another conference win or another non-conference win, and they're kind of carrying until Wisconsin there, Joe, and now Illinois at the Garden. Purdue was carrying the Big Ten non-conference wise, and they got a chance to do another good one here.
yeah, Sean, I think this is probably going to be less of a good matchup because I think Purdue is just going to roll all over Alabama. I still think they're kind of pissed off that they lost to Northwestern, even though it'll already have simmered for a week. I don't think Alabama defensively is going to match up at all with Purdue.
Nope.
I think this game could be really ugly, and which is very good for the Big Ten.
Yeah, if Alabama makes some threes, they can hang, but they do not guard anybody, really. And they give up 91 points to Oregon, Joe, 85 to Clemson. Now, these are good teams, 92 to Ohio State. So if you're Purdue, I think you're thinking if you just have at least an average day defensively, you're going to walk out of there with a victory. 2 o'clock, Holiday Hoops Giving down in Atlanta. Auburn plays Indiana. Hoosiers, a big chance to kind of cement a win here, being like, yes, we're actually better than people say. Auburn's coming off a loss to Appalachian State on the road, and it'll be a battle in the paint between Janai Broom and Khalil Ware.
Don, I think Indiana is, maybe you disagree as a Hoosier fan, is kind of in a somewhat similar position, maybe a little worse off so because of who Illinois has beaten. Uh, I think this is a very good opportunity, but not one that's going to cost them if they lose. And since it's a non-conference game, what really do they have to lose? I argue, right?
They do have a week off before they host Kansas next Saturday. And if they pull off this one, Joe, that Kansas game there'll be almost no pressure around that. And, I would think that Indiana would knock them out. But it'll be interesting to see how Auburn plays. It is a neutral for them, obviously significantly closer to Auburn, Alabama, in Atlanta there than Bloomington. But Auburn has been pretty poor on the road and in the neutral this year. They played Baylor up at the Pentagon in South Dakota. And IU looked, okay, and they're 2 neutral games. So good opportunity for a win here. And if Indiana wins it, I think you can really start thinking about, getting into the top 25 and trying to get a top 4 seed in the Big Ten. Last game on Saturday, Joe. Wisconsin heads to number 1 Arizona. Talk about a gut check for the Badgers. They've been awesome recently, but they go to statistically the hardest game in college basketball on the road at number 1. Arizona's been great. They did have a win at Duke. This is a complete house money game for the Badgers.
Don, if Wisconsin wins this, it undoes all of the Big Ten sins. I'm serious because that would kind of prove that they're a top 10 team. Not kind of. That would prove they're a top 10 team. I sound so teenage girly there. Arizona's the best team in the country. I think analytically it almost checks out, but based on the eye test, clearly that's why they're number 1 in the AP poll and coaches poll. So I don't really think Wisconsin can pull this out. I don't think they have the scoring moxie to go toe-to-toe with Arizona on the road, which is fine. But, God, if they do win, that would be something to think about. But I'd have to go Arizona winning probably by 10 or 15.
Yeah, Arizona in previous years under Tommy Lloyd and even Sean Miller before that, they were really skilled offensively, but they didn't really play defense, and that's why they lost to Princeton last year. They play defense this year, and that's especially surprising since they're kind of best player is Caleb Love, who was optional defensively at North Carolina. But Arizona has, they beat Michigan State in Palm Springs on a neutral, I believe, and then they've kind of just crushed everybody else they've played since that win at Duke. So they haven't had as many tough games as a Wisconsin or another Big Ten team here, and Wisconsin should be able to play enough defense to give them a shot. But at the end, if this is Wisconsin's just got to make it a game down the stretch and see if they can pick it off. But that's 3:15 on ESPN. We've got the Garden State Showcase 8:30 on FS1 between Rutgers and Seton Hall at the Prudential Center. Not going to lie, that's not going to be a great game. Both those teams are definitely on the outside looking in right now for the NCAA tournament. Sunday, we've got Michigan, Iowa, Michigan State, Nebraska. Potential elimination game, as you said. Have to win those games. Find a way. But other than that, Joe, we're at 36 minutes, so maybe a question or two as we wrap things up.
Yeah, this is from Noah, our resident Michigan fan. Thanks again. So one game we forgot to mention was Ohio State at Penn State on BTN Saturday at 6, but that works into the question. Between Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Iowa, and Michigan State at Nebraska, how many of those home teams win? So he's not saying to make a prediction, I guess, but how many of those games do the home teams win?
I'm going to say 1.
Really?
I think Iowa wins at home.
Okay.
But
I'm going to go with 2 because I'm comfortable picking Iowa over Michigan. I'm not so comfortable just dismissing Ohio State and Michigan State rolling, which is what a lot of people can see. I bet the lines are going to favor that by the time they come out at some point tomorrow. I just think Ohio State's had so many weird games at Penn State in the past that, it could just be one of these voodoo college basketball trends.
Yeah, it's not going to be a great crowd in the middle of the day on Saturday.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was certainly the most likely to win. We're in agreement there, and the away teams will be favored in the other games, but who knows? It's early on. Ohio State, they got a chance to pick up a road win. They're playing well right now, and Penn State, they're still kind of learning how to play in the Big Ten, like we said. But that's a good question.
Yeah.
I think 1, but who knows? It could be all 3.
It really could be all 3.
Or it could be 0.
Could be 0. Yeah. With Iowa's defense, let's say Michigan does what they did against St. John's, and Iowa decides it's a great idea to miss threes and miss open layups.
And Michigan plays a little bit of defense themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, if that happens, home teams could go 0-3 in that situation. I will say, Sean, if Michigan does win or Michigan State whoever does win on the road, excluding Ohio State on Sunday, will make their fan base feel a lot better. Because if not, right now, both the Michigan school fan bases are down here. It'll just continue to plummet and plummet and plummet. So for the sake of your fan bases, both the Michigan and Michigan State, who I admittedly don't really like, you have to win for your fans. There's absolutely 0 question about it.
And before we get into one more question, Joe, remember, Iowa's not playing too hot either. And if Michigan gets a little lead early and that crowd gets a little restless, that will 100% play against the Hawkeyes. That is the negative of playing at home when you really need a win. Because if things don't go your way early, could become a disadvantage to be at home, hearing all the groans of your crowd when you miss open shots and stuff like that. But, Joe, why don't we do one more, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah. So of the borderline 500, this is from Ryan, who I believe is a Penn State fan. I need to DM him and figure this out because it's just curiosity. Is Philadelphia Eagles, Philadelphia Flyers? It's got to be Penn State, but could be Rutgers. Who knows? Anyway, of the sub 500 to 500 / borderline 500 teams, okay. So this would include Maryland, Rutgers, Iowa, Michigan State, Michigan, and Penn State. What 2 teams still have a good shot at the tournament? I don't know about good, but how about, let's say, shot?
For how much we've criticized Michigan State, they've still got the best chance of those teams to go
Absolutely.
to the tournament. Other than that, Joe,
yeah,
you're going to have to talk me into one of these other answers.
I guess maybe you could say Maryland, assuming they pick it up at home, but I've seen nothing, and nothing will indicate that to me unless they really put it on UCLA, which I don't think they
I
will.
mean, the other
Uh,
players have got to do something for Maryland,
yeah,
and
yeah. You
that's
go down the line. Rutgers has shown absolutely nothing. Iowa offensively, let's just say, I mean, I'm assuming they're going to play no defense the rest of the year because they've shown historically they can't do that, and this year that they
this year
can't
they're
do
worse
that.
than normal.
Yeah. So I doubt that unless they just become average 95 points a game, and they'll still probably lose half of them. Michigan State, as we said, really talented. And that leaves Michigan to Penn State. Penn State's rebuilding, and Michigan, it's kind of like when you get to a close game with James Franklin, if you're Michigan and Ohio State, you just kind of know what's going to happen. So I don't know, Sean. I think besides perhaps Purdue, every team in this conference is either on fire or just absolutely slumping. And I only mentioned Purdue because it doesn't even matter if you're slumping or not. You're Purdue. You already have a million wins, and you're still likely going to win the conference.
Yeah, I would say Michigan has the second best chance of those teams, Joe. Let's not forget that they are the only one of those teams to show any kind of good stretch of play this year. And I know that was the first 3 games of the year, but I mean, they didn't. You can't forget how to do that. They will have a good stretch again this year. It might be 3 games, but they're the only other team in that group that's even showed life at all this
Probably the
year.
only team with a quad one win in that stretch because Michigan State doesn't have one, Iowa doesn't have one, Penn State certainly doesn't have one,
Yeah, and who
and
knows?
that's
St.
really
John's,
bad.
when St. John's figures it out late or in the year, and they know how to actually press and get around a ball screen, that every time St. John's wins, Michigan's numbers get better too.
Absolutely.
So, Joe, I think that's all we have for him today. Be back most likely Monday for another episode. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe. Follow us on YouTube. Follow us on TikTok. And we'll see you next